So Natasha, obviously we've met. We've worked together on a couple of sessions so far. So what I'm going to be talking about today is automation and what sort of automation you might be able to introduce into your businesses to ultimately save a bit of time and increase personal efficiency. And we're going to be looking at a variety of different tasks that you might be able to automate. We're going to cover a little bit of marketing. We'll cover a little bit of invoicing. And ultimately, what we need to be thinking about when we're automating tasks is something that is fairly simple, very much repeatable, and something that is a good fit for automation, so you can free up your time for other tasks. Now, I had got a couple of slides just to introduce myself, but obviously you know who I am. And just in case, I don't think anyone else has joined yet, but obviously I've run my own business down here in Kendal, digital agency. We're building websites, marketing campaigns, and looking at how those can fit in around broader digital transformation, which, although it suggests a transformation, it is just an evolutionary series of steps that businesses need to take that is embracing new technology, but fundamentally built on robust processes that sit underneath that. Obviously, yes, you know, I'm a consultant on the program. I've written a book as well, which I'm quite happy to share with you, actually, if you like. If you want a PDF copy, I can send that. But I know your website is in pretty good shape. And I can't imagine there's plans in place at the moment to revisit that. But like I say, very happy to share that because it's not entirely all about planning. That's the emphasis, but there's obviously other elements of digital marketing that come into that. So for today, sorry.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.
It looks like we've been joined by Nathan, who is just connecting to the audio. So I'll just give him a second to let that connect before going into the agenda. So it looks like Nathan has joined us. Morning, Nathan. Don't know if you can hear us, but we've just done a quick introduction, and we're just going to continue with the agenda for today's session. So we're going to start, obviously, with the obvious question: what exactly is automation? Why might you introduce automation into your business? So I've just got a message which has come through from Nathan. Yeah, not to worry, Nathan. That's fine. Welcome. So yeah, why might you introduce automation into your business? What sort of things might you need to look out for? We're going to talk about something called your tech stack as well. And if that's a phrase that you've heard, you'll obviously know what it is. If not, we'll go into a bit more detail on what I mean by tech stack. Choosing apps for your business systems that is dependent on your tech stack. In fact, that's forming part of your tech stack. And then we're going to look at a couple of examples of what sort of things you might be able to automate, how you might plan those automations, and then we'll go into some Q&A. So if you've got any questions, then there's be plenty of opportunity to ask those at the end. If, however, you've got a question that's burning away and you want to bring it up at the point that we're talking about something in particular, then feel free to do so. More than happy to take questions, given that there's only a few of us on the call this morning. So do just shout up if there's something that you want to ask. So what is automation all about? Well, obviously, with the whole focus on this is about improving personal efficiency. So we're wanting to automate certain systems and processes within our businesses. Ultimately, it's something that can save us time because we don't have to necessarily be the one that is pushing things around the screen or moving bits of paper effectively from one place to another. We can set up certain systems and services that can automate those tasks, and that gives it a degree of consistency. So we can actually then reduce errors and mistakes that might happen. You know, particularly if I go right back to the days when I started the business sort of 10, 12 years ago, I would sit and manually enter invoices. I don't do any of that anymore. And I look back and think, what a waste of time that was. But of course, when I'm manually putting invoices in, there's obviously scope for error. They would probably get picked up at some point when I was doing a bank reconciliation or something like that. But if there is scope for mistakes, by automating the process around it, then there's obviously you can improve the way that you eliminate those mistakes and deliver a more consistent experience, particularly if it involves other people on your team, customers. Obviously, a phrase that we've all heard many, many times is about working smarter and not harder. So using the technology to make our lives easier. And from a marketing perspective, which is very much where automation fits in very nicely, it can be about building and nurturing relationships and ultimately being connected with people. You know, we've all seen this huge shift towards more digital technology through the pandemic, but ultimately what we've lacked through a lot of that time is that connection with people. And while the technology is great, as we'll see as we go through the presentation this morning, that human connection is still really, really important. Obviously, which business doesn't want to improve efficiency? So that's one of the other benefits of automating our processes. And of course, if we can do that, then potentially we can reduce our costs without any extra effort. And that has the potential then to improve our profitability. So systemization versus automation. I think it's worth making a distinction between systems, processes, and automation. Automation kind of comes last. You know, to begin with, you've got a system that is your business. Your overall business is a system. Within your business, you have processes that might seem obvious. So your business is one system. You might have an accounting process within that. You might have a customer service process within that. And I often make the analogy to something like Transport for London. That is the overall system. That includes trains, you've got the underground, you've got the overground, obviously you've got national rail stations that fit in around that. That's your overall system. Then you've got the processes and subsystems within that. So for example, you've got the ticket machines, you've got the maintenance plans, you've got the signage. So those all contribute to being part of the bigger system. In your business, you need an effective accounts process to be able to support your business system. So we are really looking at what those systems are within your business, what the processes are that support those systems. And once you've established what they are and what the goals are from each of those, then you're in a position to say, well, where can the technology support us? How can we use technology to enhance and improve that system, that process, which ultimately improves the overall system? So, like I say, you're going to have both in your businesses, and it's really a case of then looking at each of those and how can the technology support you. Now, what you don't have to do necessarily, even though you might go through this process of systemization, you don't necessarily have to automate everything. Just by going through the process and coming up with systems can be really efficient and a really big step forwards that can improve profitability without you having to automate things. Let's take the example of pilots when they get into the cockpit. It's a job that they do day in, day out. Obviously, flying is highly regulated. They have systems, they have processes, and they have a pre-flight checklist, and they are obviously very rigorously followed. Everything is documented. So even though the pilot's doing this day in, day out, they are checking that, they're checking it against their co-pilot to make absolutely certain that that system and that process is being followed to the letter. So even though you might not have automation in there, just having clarity over what that process needs to be, how it needs to start, where it needs to finish, and what the outcome from that process is, can be really valuable. So while automation may be part of the goal, it doesn't have to necessarily be implemented to get the benefits of going through this process. So systemization is, like I said, it's the start point for your automation. And working through what those are gives you the various steps, that pre-flight checklist that you can then work through in your head, on paper, however you like to do it. At that point, you can then look and see where can we add technology to this to make this happen automatically. Ultimately, we're building something with the inputs and the outputs. And the output might very simply be saving time, but more likely there will be a number of other inputs and outputs that go into the process. So let's take an invoice automation process, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail later on. I get an invoice in that comes to me, perhaps by my email. The output is it appears in my account software, and therefore I've not had to manually process anything in between. That's a very simple process. Now, if you're looking at some sort of marketing automation that might be nurturing customer relationships, you've perhaps got a number of different stages. It might play out over a week. It could be several months, depending on the lead time, how long it takes your customers to buy from you. So clearly you're going to have lots of different inputs, and those inputs are going to come in at different times as well as part of that process. And indeed, the same could be said for the outputs. So essentially, the start point through creating your systems and processes is that pre-flight checklist. And I think that's a really nice way to think about it. Then you can put those things in place, even if you just document them on, perhaps, I don't know, some companies might have a staff handbook. Some people might just have a web page where they can document some of these processes, and it forms a reference, even if automation isn't the immediate goal. So who's using automation? Well, according to McKinsey and emailmonday.com, where I've picked these two particular references from, 31% of businesses have said they've fully automated at least one function. Now, obviously, if we're talking about McKinsey, these are going to be global players in many cases, and you'll have seen automation yourself. If you've ever called any of the utility companies, even just the auto attendant on the phone, press option 1 for this, option 2 for the other, that is a form of automation. So we know that automation is very widely adopted within a lot of businesses. However, 38% of companies are saying that they've not yet begun to automate business processes. So there is still a huge opportunity for companies to take advantage of the automation opportunities there and really see the benefits from it. Now, what's interesting here is smaller companies are less likely than larger companies to automate processes, but their success rate is higher. Now, I think there's a number of reasons for that. Bigger companies tend to have a little bit more red tape and bureaucracy, and therefore perhaps they've gone through, maybe they just don't get over all of that before they get their processes automated and things like that. And they hit these barriers, people come and go, and therefore the motivation can be lost. However, in a smaller company, I think that the stumbling block is the initial effort to get automations in place. I'm sure that you'll have done the same as me, where you've looked at something and thought, well, I could automate that, but it's going to take me 10 minutes to automate it. And right now, I just haven't got the time. I'm just going to do it the normal way. So that, I think, is the main stumbling block in smaller businesses. But obviously, once you get over that hurdle, then you start and see the benefits, and you appreciate putting that 10 minutes in at some point. And it might be 10 minutes if you're lucky. It might be a few hours, but you start and see the benefits of it, and you never look back. Particularly with smaller businesses, there can be staff moving around, can be less. Particularly if you've got owner managers, they're going to be in there for the long haul. So once you're over that initial hurdle and have put automation in place, the impact of it is felt much more widely. 51% of companies are using marketing automation. It's interesting, marketing automation can be anything from sending an autoresponder from somebody sending an email through your website form, if they get in contact with you on your contact form on your website, and there's an automatic email that acknowledges that. That is a form of marketing automation, not a very complex one, but nonetheless, that is still marketing automation. Where you could really enhance that is by having perhaps a series of additional follow-up emails that might set expectations around what the customer can expect. There might be a follow-up email that says, was everything resolved to your satisfaction? Please leave us a rating and a review. All those different types of routes that you could take by way of marketing automation. And then 58% of B2B companies are planning to adopt the technology. So that's great. It means that a lot of people have got this sort of thing on their wish list. But as we've seen, it may take time to get those in place because they've got to get over that initial hurdle, or because of challenges that they face actually putting the systems and processes in place to begin with. So what exactly is being automated? Well, right at the top of the chart, we've got optimizing productivity. So that is the main reason that people are wanting to automate things, is ultimately trying to drive that efficiency into the business. Second up is increasing marketing return on investment, and that's an obvious one, really. If you've got those sorts of nurturing campaigns that I'm sure you will have seen at some point yourselves, And if we look at Amazon as well, in terms of how they send out their marketing emails, and of course, it's not just Amazon, but they're very focused, very targeted messages, and there's no real extra human effort being put into that. Their system is gathering all the recommendations and suggestions for you. There is no one person that is sat there at the other end saying, oh, well, I think they've bought this, so they'll like the look of this. It's all happening automatically. For no extra effort, they're able to email you at a higher rate in a more targeted way, and ultimately that's going to improve the return on investment from that approach. Improving campaign management, that's really about allowing people to take control and take ownership of what they want to hear from you. So instead of having people having to contact you and say, oh, can you put me on this mailing list instead, which I can't think has ever happened, you're inviting that opportunity for people to actually go and manage their own preferences. So you might be asking for more information and sort of building up a bit more of a profile of people. Every time that people click on that sort of preference center, might be a link that you've seen at the bottom of a lot of emails, a link to a preference center. You can update your details, and perhaps at the same time you can choose different lists that you might want to be included on. So of course, for every campaign that they send, when they have people self-serving and self-managing their own preferences, those campaigns are becoming more and more targeted. So getting people to manage their own data. And the same applies there for database quality as well. You know, when you've got people able to manage and self-serve, perhaps e-commerce accounts, they can update their own address books, then you are relying on that housekeeping of a database, which is really challenging because people move around and they change their email addresses and those sorts of things. If you can get other people to do that for you, then it's never going to be 100% accurate, but it's obviously taking a lot of that legwork away from yourselves. Acquiring more customers. You know, who doesn't want more leads and more customers? We might not necessarily want more customers depending on capacity, but we're certainly going to be wanting leads. You know, you can never have enough leads, I don't think. So at least getting those leads in, managing those leads, and using automation perhaps to funnel them through a CRM, customer relationship management type platform. So you can understand who's responsible for following up, who's responsible for perhaps closing a deal, who's responsible for sending some information out. Again, all depends on different types of businesses, but these are just some example use cases based on the sort of the top areas that have been automated. Measuring performance is obviously an interesting one, and that really depends on the type of business. You know, what sort of performance? Is it people performance? Is it product performance? Is it manufacturing performance? Could be a real variety of things in there. And I don't have particular strength when it comes to understanding automation around robotics and manufacturing processes. So my focus is very much around marketing automation and using technology to facilitate operational side of the business, rather than more specific areas like production and manufacturing. But nonetheless, that's very much up there in terms of what people are wanting to do. And then aligning marketing and sales, which kind of comes back into CRM as well. The idea that you might have a sales lead that goes into a customer relationship management database, but that lead might take 12 months to convert, particularly in B2B, business to business environments. The lead time can be quite long. If it's in a B2C environment where you're dealing with consumers, then those lead times tend to be much shorter, and obviously the automation approach would be very different. But aligning marketing and sales is there at the bottom at 24%. So there is overlap between some of those, but in terms of what people are actually automating, that tends to be the priorities that we're seeing. Now, it's great talking about all this automation. As I alluded to at the beginning, the idea of perhaps having these things done at arm's reach. We've all been through the pandemic where we've seen the growth of digital, but we've also seen that human connection taken away from us through lockdown. And it's incredible to think that this phrase, high tech, high touch, was coined back in 1982. For 40 years ago, this idea of technology becoming more involved was great, obviously, but it still demanded high touch, a high human touch to make the offset against the high technology. And I think as humans, we do look for a connected experience, and it can be really frustrating when you ring a utility company or prime candidates like BT, and it just feels like left hand doesn't talk to right hand. So while you've got all this automation in place, what can be massively frustrating is when quite clearly it doesn't work, or more to the point, it doesn't work for you. From a company perspective, they might look at the bigger picture and say, well, yes, we've improved efficiency by X, but actually if customer satisfaction has fallen down by X, just how much benefit has really been delivered to the company. So that high touch is really needed to counter the high tech. And I think that is absolutely relevant today. And, there is really so many different tools around that manage and support customer experience. It's never been more accessible, and it's never been more needed than it has been now, because people want that self-service. They want to be able to manage themselves. They don't want to have to pick up and wait in a telephone queue. They don't want to have to wait for someone else's CRM to load up while they look up the notes on the account and all that sort of thing. All of that is an inconvenience for people. So that idea that customer service needs to be met with an element of technology to ultimately deliver the right customer experience. So things to look out for when we're automating some of our systems and processes. And again, bearing in mind that I'm really, we'll talk about a variety of different areas shortly, but primarily I'm talking about marketing automation for the purposes of this webinar, because that's the area that most businesses are going to look to automate. Yes, there can be some operational things, but they tend to be internal and they'll be a bit more specific. But for the purpose of a generic webinar like this, looking at marketing automation is the general focus. So things to look out for is that people can often tell when marketing automation has been used. And in some cases, that's fine. If I fill in a form on a website, or if I've filled in some sort of refund request after I bought something online, to get some sort of automated acknowledgement is kind of a given. I'd expect that. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. But there are opportunities to make that just raise an eyebrow and add a little bit of personality, a bit of storytelling into that, perhaps. So when people do get that automation, they just don't feel like they've been treated as a robot. They don't feel they're just another cog in the very big wheel, but there's an element perhaps of personalization. There's an element of fun. There's a certain tone of voice that it's done in, that makes a process feel, oh, that's a little bit interesting. This company does care a little more. They've actually thought about my particular needs, my particular situation. And as you can see there, again, I'm sure you will have found yourself, 71% of consumers are frustrated when that experience is impersonal. Nobody wants to be just another cog in the wheel. We want to feel that we're, when an automated message says, you are a valued customer, well, we all think, yeah, of course I am. That's just somebody that's written that on their automation platform. But we still want to feel that. We still want to feel that we are relevant and we're not just another number. So I think there's opportunities to think really carefully about the content and how that automation is managed. That yes, okay, it's introducing that efficiency, but you're also adding that element of the human touch in the way that you're approaching it. Automation has no sense of time or context. That's a really interesting point. There was a company called Bloom and Wild that introduced the thoughtful marketing, thoughtful marketing approach, or something, words to that effect. And they were one of the first companies that openly said, we are not going to send emails out to a particular group of people. Now, if you've come across Bloom and Wild, they're a florist, an online florist, so they're delivering flowers by mail. And one of the bits of feedback that they had was around Mother's Day. And people did not want to get email reminders saying, buy flowers for Mother's Day, if their parents had passed on. So they made it very clear in terms of how they would create their automations that you could opt out. Very simple, something that is very commonly done, but it was the way they'd done it and the way they'd approached it in a very human way. And it even got to a subject that was debated in Parliament when this hit the press. So understanding that your audience are not necessarily all the same, they don't necessarily all fall into the same bracket, is really important. And that sense of time and context could be particularly relevant as well, depending on the type of messages that you're sending out. Setting a purpose for your automation and planning it. Obviously, nobody wants to be spammed. Nobody wants to get unnecessary emails. So sometimes if you're planning automation, it makes sense to build in a little bit of opt-out. Is there an opportunity to say, look, we've not heard from you for a little while. Please click here to confirm that you still want to hear from us. Give people the options, give people the choices. Don't inundate them with messages that they know ultimately are going to be automated. So if you sign up for an online service, you sign up at 10 o'clock at night because you're looking on an evening. If you get those follow-up emails that are telling you how to use that service and they all come at night, then obviously you know that they're going to be coming from an automated source. So just thinking about, do people want to be working? Do they want to be checking their emails every night at 10 o'clock? No, more likely they'll be doing it during the daytime. So, is there scope to adjust the timing and the scheduling of some of those messages that make it more relevant? And of course, the more complex your automations are, then the more testing is required to mitigate risk. What you really want to do is keep things simple. You can end up in a real messy mix of a bit like a spider's web, where you've got all these different things happening. If a piece of content needs to change, or if there's a particular automation that you're not getting results from, or you've not had good feedback from, to try and pin it down and find it, you want to be able to go straight to it without it becoming one of those things that, oh, well, is it the website that starts that? Or is it the third email in the sequence that we've set up that triggers this particular action? You want to have clarity where those things are. So if things don't work, or if you get particular feedback, then you can make a change to how the automation flows. So steps to successful automation is focus on the people and the processes first. Think about who you're dealing with, who your audiences are, excuse me, and what sort of processes need to be followed to maximize the efficiency and impact either within the business or for the customer. Start small and build up over time. The idea of KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Again, you really don't want to end up in this sort of really tightly woven net of all these different automations. And if you think of businesses at a certain level, there's going to be dozens of different automations. They need to be really clearly labeled. And I think it's really important that there is a log. So every time you're creating these automations, you can see what the trigger is. Are there any dependencies on the website, for example? Does the need to allow somebody to download something if you're directing them to I don't know, download an industry report or plans, whatever it might be. So you need to keep things simple to begin with. It's always something that you can roll up over time. And that would absolutely be the way that I would suggest it. Start small and you can layer up as you become more confident, or as you see the benefits coming through, or perhaps you adopt different software that allows you to take things up to the next level. Key thing, test them regularly. You want to put yourself in the shoes of your own customers. I always find this amazing for companies that run e-commerce sites. It's not been unheard of for companies to contact us and say, well, we don't think our payments have been working for the last 2 days. It's very easy to just keep going in. You don't want to be doing it every day, of course, but you can set up automated tests to make sure that the payment process runs smoothly. Or if there's a critical series of pages that people need to go through, you can set tests up that will go through 1, 2, 3, however many steps there are, even to the extent of filling in forms and making sure that the process actually works. But I think it's still really important every 3 months or so, if you've got a very customer-focused area in your website, or you're very reliant on technology or an automation that is engaging with customers, test it on a regular basis. Put yourself in the shoes of the customer. How does it feel to get that email that comes back? Is the timing right? Is the follow-up right? Is the language right? The tone of voice? All of those sorts of things. Sometimes after you've set the automations up, they become a little bit more obvious that you might want to change certain aspects of them. So ultimately, while the technology is great, it is not a fix for poor process. And I think you've absolutely got to start with the process, decide the inputs that you need to put into the process. What is it you want to get out of it? What are the benefits for you? What are the benefits for your customer? What are the business benefits? And ultimately at that point, you can then assess, is that a process that we're happy with? Is it robust? Is it going to stand the test under different sets of circumstances? And then how can we enhance that with technology that perhaps makes it a little bit more efficient, a bit more consistent, and perhaps frees up some of your time so you're not involved with it on a manual basis. So we'll move on to talk about tech stack, because that now allows us to get into a little bit more by way of examples of using automation. Now, the tech stack, if it's a term you've not heard of, it is basically the apps that you're using in your business. Now, you'll know that there are apps 10 a penny these days, starting from your website to your account software to a customer relationship management system. You might just have a single application in your business that you're very reliant on. I suspect in many businesses, the fundamental one that few will get away without having is your accounts. So it might just be a single application in a simple or a small business. But at some point, you are going to want to build that up, and you're probably going to have a combination of different apps. Even if you then bring in something like Office 365 or Google Workspace, that forms part of your tech stack, and it can include your website. So as a bit more of an example, here are all different types of platforms that are available on a subscription type basis that ultimately could form part of your tech stack. So you'll recognize some of these: WordPress, obviously, as a website content management system; MailChimp for email marketing; Xero is accounts; ActiveCampaign is a customer relationship management / email platform; Stripe for payments; Shopify is an e-commerce platform for online shops; Slack is instant chat; GoCardless is a direct debit collection tool; Teamwork is a collaborative working environment, as is Trello. And then you've got things like Microsoft 365, Google Workspace that can give you your business essentials, if you will, your word processing, your spreadsheet, your email. So all of those types of platforms fall into your tech stack. Now, your tech stack matters because they all sit in the cloud, and you ultimately need the cloud to enable the automation between all of these different systems. Different apps serve different parts of your workflow. So as I said, Office 365 perhaps provides your email, Xero perhaps provides your accounts, Stripe then perhaps is a step further down, which provides your payment options. So you've got a sequence of events. You might email an invoice out, or you communicate with your customer over email, you create an invoice, and obviously then you want to get paid for it. So really what we're looking for to be able to automate things are, where can we make these different apps talk to each other? How can we join them together so we can actually join those steps as part of that process together, and we can obviously remove ourselves from it. So most of these apps will have something called an API, which just stands for an application programming interface. APIs tend to allow more custom integrations. So for example, you could connect different services to your website through an API. Really what you'd be looking for in most cases is a ready-made integration. So that would be something like Xero and Stripe. They naturally talk to each other. That's already been built. You don't have to have any development. You just connect the accounts. Similarly for GoCardless, that collects direct debits, you can connect that to Xero. So when you create an invoice that's using the direct debit invoice theme, then that will automatically connect through to GoCardless and collect the payment by direct debit once you've got a mandate in place with that particular customer. So we're really looking at how we can make our apps talk to each other. However, there is a but. Not all apps were created equally. So not all of the apps that you use in your business necessarily have these integrations. Most will have some integrations, but perhaps not all of the ones that you want. Some will have APIs, some won't. And if there is an API, you might need to get into custom development, but that can incur additional cost. And obviously you need to be really sure that the process is going to be right for you if you're then going to put in additional investment to make it sort of a core part of how your business operates, if you will. So middleware, as I call it, is the missing link. So although custom development can be an option, there are certain middleware tools that make that a little bit easier. So let's just have a quick look at the Xero App Marketplace. So Xero is accounts, and many of you, both of you might be using it, or you could be using QuickBooks or Sage. But here we can see that Xero will connect directly into a variety of different tools. Capsule is a CRM. HubSpot is a popular CRM as well. MailChimp, as we've heard, email marketing. So it might be that for every customer that you add into Xero, you're automatically adding them to a MailChimp list, or it could be vice versa. Sometimes you've got to be careful about how you want these integrations to work. For example, if you're adding customers to your MailChimp list, they've not yet become a customer, so you probably wouldn't want them to appear in Xero. So there's usually different ways that you can set these integrations up to work. But a lot of the apps, like Xero, you see here, have these marketplaces, or at the very least, a list of other tools and systems and services that they will integrate with. If we just go across to Capsule as a CRM, you can see there on their webpage, there's the integrations option on the menu, and it shows you some of the headline integrations that they have. So obviously there's a reverse there. We can connect back into Xero. And as a CRM, Capsule allows you to list the invoices. It can't give you access to them, but it at least show you the invoices that have been raised against a particular customer record. So again, if you think back to the time that you last called United Utilities or whoever it might have been, and they said, let me just look up the details on your account, you can look up that customer record in your CRM. You might have notes against when you last spoke to that customer, what they were interested in, and if they've bought from you previously, then you can see details of their invoices, and in fact, even an outstanding invoice as well. I talked about middleware, and you may have heard of these platforms as well. Zapier is probably the most commonly known, and the others are not quite as widely known and don't tend to include as many different systems and services. IFTTT is if this, then that. So what you're basically saying in all of these situations is, if something happens over here on app A, then I want that to happen over in app B. So for example, if there was an integration that didn't exist, let's say, for example, every time you added somebody to a CRM, you wanted to create an Excel spreadsheet. You wanted to add that record to an Excel spreadsheet. Might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but there's no direct way of doing that. Yes, okay, you could add them into your CRM, export them into a spreadsheet. That's a fairly common approach. But let's say you wanted to automate it using something like Zapier, you'd be able to connect it to your CRM, and then you connect it into your Office 365 account, and then you can choose certain triggers and then certain outputs that want to happen from the process. And that's a platform that can be used for free. You can have up to 5 zaps, as they call it, before you get into a paid plan. So if there's no direct integration, sometimes this type of middleware can sit really nicely and facilitate that for you, sometimes at no cost, or at least a small cost without any extra development work. So let's go into some practical examples of what you could automate. Let's start with an obvious one that some of you probably used automation on before, social media accounts. That's an easy one to automate. Lots of different platforms exist to do this. Hootsuite, Later, Sendable, Buffer, and Sprout. They are all automation platforms for social media. So you can plan your content in advance, create your content calendars, so you know what sort of themes you might be following through the year. Do you have particular seasons? Are there particular events? Is it Christmas, Father's Day, Mother's Day, Easter? Is it the Olympics? Is it the FA Cup, the World Cup? All those sorts of things would go into a content calendar where they are relevant to your particular business. So you can plan your content in advance, and then either you can be scheduling it, or you could get a VA, virtual assistant, to do some of that scheduling for you based on your content. And then you have spent your time concentrating on the tone of voice, the language, the themes that you want your business to be promoting. Someone else can then do the easier task of just actually scheduling that work, leaving you then to focus your time on other things. So yes, it still needs to be manually populated. That bit is not an automation, but you can then plan your content a month in advance, and that can be drip fed out through the month, over time, or through the week, whatever time frame you're choosing to work on. And you can target multiple platforms at the same time. So if you're wanting to post into Instagram and Twitter on a regular basis, rather than having to go into both platforms, you can post the same content to different platforms. Whether that's right or wrong might depend on the type of business that you're in and your audience on those respective channels. But nonetheless, that's one of the features and benefits that you can have in these platforms. You can build a library of assets as well. So if you've had a raft of professional photography done, instead of scrabbling around to find the latest images, you can build those up, and you can actually save them into these platforms. And you can sometimes curate content from other sources as well. So they can actually crawl around and you might pick a certain theme. It might be property, it might be technology, it might be social affairs, it might be the news. And therefore you can then start and post that content out that's come from third-party sources on your own account as well. One of the big benefits, aside from saving time, is that you can actually recycle content through this. And I think that's one of the points around content that is often misunderstood. Just posting it out on Twitter today does not mean that it's been seen. If you post something that, let's say it's a press release, you might have to post that 5, even 10 times before the majority of your audience on Twitter have seen it. So being able to recycle that content, reuse it, even if you've run out of things to say, basically put things in a big queue, then it can mean that you've got a continuous stream of content that at least doesn't leave your channels looking a little bit blank. So that's an example of Sendable. That's how that looks. You can see we've got a calendar there, and we can see where we've got content which has been scheduled in Facebook in the dark blue, Twitter in the light blue, and Instagram in red. And you can usually connect a variety of different social platforms into that. And obviously you can do your scheduling all in one go, and then it runs through the month. One thing not to forget, of course, is that social media is an interactive channel. And if people are replying, you need to be able to correspond with people and reply back to them. But this kind of approach does avoid being tongue-tied and thinking, well, I've not posted for a while, can't really think about what to say, oh, I'll do it another day. It does get out of that kind of situation. Let's have a look at some accounting automations. So I'm looking here at Xero and QuickBooks. Sage, I'm less familiar with. Generally speaking, they were a little bit behind the cloud accounting curve. But there could be other platforms that exist. There's things like Free Agent that exist as well. All depends on the size and type of your business. But Xero and QuickBooks are the most common. So for example, setting up recurring invoices is something that's very straightforward to do. If you've got subscriptions, for example, we have, if companies take email accounts with us, it's a monthly payment. So we can set up a recurring invoice in Xero. We can create automatic payment reminder email sequences. So again, I'm not having to chase necessarily. I might at some point, if it's still unpaid after say 4 reminder emails, then of course someone's going to have to get involved. But at least there is a process there that can automate some of that and hopefully avoid getting to having to chase those payments. We can collect payments by card and direct debit. We can also connect to various reporting platforms. And in our case, and probably lots of other businesses, the whole benefit is that you can work more closely with your accountant because they have access to the same thing. I remember back in the day being asked to back up a Sage file, and then it was too big to email across. So I had to put it on a memory stick and take it down to their offices. How the world has changed in a very short space of time. So those are just some of the benefits that cloud accounting can bring. But if we were to look at some basic automation, Xero will accept an invoice by email, and it'll try and extract the text from it, and then it will allocate it to a particular customer, and obviously you can put the description in, the amount, the due date, all those sorts of things. So using my cloud workspace, such as Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace, I could set up a rule in my inbox. So let's say I've got a subscription with Sendable, which is one of the social media platforms that we set up. Every month, the email comes in. It's going to be the same every month. It's going to have your invoice, your latest invoice is available in the subject. So I can be really specific and confident that I can set up a rule that when an email comes in from Sendable with this text in the subject, do something with it. So I can go and grab the email address, the forwarding email address from Xero, add that into the inbox rule. So every month going forwards, that email drops into my inbox. Because it's in the cloud, it doesn't matter whether I'm there, whether I've got my inbox open or not, it automatically gets forwarded through to Xero, and Xero will extract the text and it will appear in my accounts payable. So really simple way of setting up an automation around that. We could go one step further, and this is a model that we use. So for example, we have this middleware again, but it's called Receipt Bank, has recently been named to Dex. I'm not quite sure why. Receipt Bank made a lot more sense. Receipt Bank is an app. So I get an email address, I forward it through to Receipt Bank. Some of the payments then get checked by my virtual assistant who does some of our bookkeeping for us, because some of them, inevitably there might be one-off transactions. There can be, sometimes the certain elements might not be extracted, particularly if it's a handwritten invoice, not very often, but certain elements might need just to be double checked. For regular invoices, the whole thing just goes straight through to Xero. Some that need checking. But the beauty with Receipt Bank is that if I go and, I go and get some tea and coffee for the office from Morrison's, I can snap that receipt into Receipt Bank and then forward it through to Xero. And that's one of the things that Xero by itself can't do, but using Receipt Bank, it allows me to do that. If we look at the wider ecosystem around Xero, we saw earlier, we can connect it to MailChimp, we can connect it to Shopify, to Stripe, to Google, to Microsoft, to GoCardless, and to our website. So there are lots of different ways that you could set up automations within
I think Andrew has frozen.
Yeah.
Bear with me 2 minutes. I'm sure he'll come back in a moment.
Okay.
That's interesting. Never had that happen before, so bear with me. Luckily, we're coming to the end, so. Bear with 2 minutes, we'll get him back. He's gone again, so I think he's going to log back in. I won't contact him, I'll just give him a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Sorry about this, guys.
That's okay. These things happen, don't they?
They do, especially when bizarrely we can talk about the weather in these instances, because it sometimes has an impact.
Yeah, we find that on our internet. Yeah.
Just give him a couple of more minutes. He was in such flow. Oh, that's a shame. I think, well, I would guess he would come back in. He hasn't dropped me a line on anything else, so he's probably logging back in as we speak.
Yeah.
It's just
when your
getting, I think
connection
he was
goes,
probably
you just stuck.
his last few slides were going to be about the actual masterclass that this is based around and the 3 sessions that are happening from October. Okay. Just check it. Ah, here he is. Thought he would be. Hello.
Sorry, everybody. I'm back. Not quite sure what happened there.
Yeah, we're not
everything
sure.
just
But,
suddenly dropped off.
Yeah, we'll let you carry on, and then we had discussed the fact that it was very nearly the end, so it wasn't too bad. Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
Okay, so yes, where do we get to? So that broader ecosystem within Xero, what could it help you achieve? So sending, repeating invoices, collecting payment via direct debit, completely hands-free now for us. Being able to email invoices with a Stripe payment link. So people can just click the link and they can pay online by card. Obviously a bit quicker and easier than going into your online banking and paying by backs. Perhaps automatically send a sequence of payment reminders, sync invoices with web sales, particularly if you're in an e-commerce environment. perhaps automatically add customers to a MailChimp list, sell subscription-based products with Stripe, reducing average debtor days, and perhaps reducing input errors or incorrect account classifications. So all of that basically means that you can get better consistency, improving things like your VAT returns, and ultimately an element of more profit, more time, faster growth. It's not going to be silver bullet. All of these things are incremental and they all contribute to that bigger picture. But it can also mean perhaps more choice for your customer, variety of different payment options, giving people choice, more products, maybe even new products. The idea of having been able to introduce subscriptions, if the technology allows you to do that, does that open up new product opportunities? And if you're anything like me, fewer spinning plates, which is always a good thing. Let's quickly look at some marketing options around automation. As I said earlier, it could very simply be a basic website response. But on the right-hand side here, we've got a couple of other options that actually perhaps add people through from your website into a MailChimp mailing list. That triggers an autoresponder back to the person who sent the initial inquiry. Over a sequence of time, period of time, you might then choose to send a sequence of follow-up emails. Obviously, really depends on the type of product you're selling, the lead time that it might have, the complexity of the product, and of course, the amount of information that people might have requested from you. But the idea that you can then send a drip campaign, as it's commonly known, over time that nurtures that relationship and helps people to better understand the products and services and the value that you offer.
We can't see your slides, Andrew. Lost those on the way.
There we go. Sorry, everybody. Right, there we go. So yeah, left-hand example, the basic website response, and then on the right-hand side, the idea of having a slightly more sort of detailed nurture campaign that can allow you to send, like I say, a drip campaign over time. And by the way, I'm more than happy for these slides to be shared with you. Janet has a copy, so she can send those on after the event. Another way that automation can work is for meetings and appointments. Those of you who've worked with me on the Digital Tech Cumbria program will know this is an approach that I take. I use Calendly. So you know what it's like. There's emails that go back and forth. How about Wednesday? No, I can't do Wednesday. What about Thursday morning? Oh, I can do the afternoon. Oh, I can't. Let's make it Friday. Cut out all of that back and forth with emails to try and arrange appointments. Simply send out a Calendly link, which is what I do. You can then extrapolate on that again, like I said earlier, you can layer up on these things. So you might start by sending out an email link with a calendar that might add the contact into a CRM, your CRM database. A period of time might elapse again. They get a follow-up email, and you might then be able to see what they've interacted with on that email. It might be a link to view a video or download a PDF document on your website. But there's different ways that you can make that process, that entire process of booking an appointment with you, a little bit more relevant. So they've perhaps got a better expectation of what they need to do to prepare for it, what they need to bring, how long it's going to last, all those sorts of things. So like I say, just making the process a little bit smoother. And then finally, data automations. It amazes me when we became a supplier to quite a large company that we got a spreadsheet that we were asked to fill in with our bank details and everything that goes with it when you become a supplier to a company. So that meant that someone had to extract the spreadsheet at their end, send it across. I received it. In this particular example, it still had another company's data in it. Not great when you think of all the privacy restrictions and concerns that people have these days. So I had to then remove that, fill it in with my own data, email it back, and the other end, of course, someone has to then process that too. All of that could have been made so much easier by introducing something like Google Forms or Microsoft Forms, where I wouldn't have to worry about other data. It goes straight into a platform that can easily be exported into a spreadsheet. Google Workspace, an area of that I have particular experience with over Microsoft, is you can then trigger certain things to happen. So by default, a Google form will go into a spreadsheet. but you can then do all sorts. So you could actually set up a document with the data that people submit, sort of pre-filling all the form fields and things like that if needed. Obviously depends on the use case, but that is a much quicker, much more efficient way of asking people to submit data. And you could do that for information like supplier details, name and address type information, or you could use it for surveys and things like that to get feedback and ratings from customers. So we are just about at the end. A couple of quick points around planning your automations. Look at your internal and your customer process. Obviously, it really depends on what you're automating and therefore where the real benefit is going to be felt. Is it something that your team are going to feel the benefit from, or is it something your customers will feel the benefit from? Could be both, of course. Think about the processes that you are doing on a manual basis within the business. What about the ones that you really hate doing? Perhaps the one that takes you a long time, the ones that you sort of sat there doing at 10 o'clock at night thinking there's got to be a better way. Trust me, I've been there. And the ones that follow the same routine. That's really what we're looking for. They've got to be fairly simple to begin with. They've got to be very repeatable. And there's got to be obviously tools and technology that can support them. But as I say, you want your process to be clear first. And some of those will obviously be easier than others. Now you can start by just getting a flip chart or a piece of paper. I like this kind of approach. Whether you've got a whiteboard and just use Post-it notes, you can mark them up, use different colors so you can see what needs to happen when, what sort of action people might be expected to do. There is also in this now much more virtual world that we live in, tools like Miro, where you can essentially have your own whiteboard. And you can, again, just in the same way, you can use stickies or Post-it notes that you can put on screen, and then you can draw arrows between them and so on that allow you to sort of visualize what those automations would look like and how they'll flow from end to end. Think about the benefits that you're going to expect from the automations. That's obviously why we're going to do it. We don't want to automate just for the sake of it. There needs to be a way to measure them. How are you going to measure them? Is it just by being able to say, well, 10 invoices might take me 2 minutes an invoice, therefore I've saved 20 minutes. Could be very simple in that sense. Obviously, if you're going down that customer nurturing route through a more marketing-led automation, then you really want to be thinking about, are we improving our conversion rate? Are we getting more people signed up to our mailing list? What sort of spin-off benefits might you be able to realize from that? Will those customers be interested in other products? Can you gather more information from those customers to build a bit more of a detailed profile about them in terms of what they might want to buy from you, why it is they're interested in your products and services? And of course, set a timetable to review them. I think as a minimum, you want to be testing them on a quarterly basis, just making sure that everything that you're saying, the process flows, the language is still relevant. So you need to have that rhythm around testing and not setting and forgetting. That's where things can sometimes go wrong. So very quickly, we've talked about what automation is and why you might introduce it to your business. We've talked about some of the things to look out for, that idea of high tech, high touch, and providing a humanized experience, because people will recognize if they've been treated like robots or if they're at the end of an automation. And that's not the end of the world, of course. There is a certain expectation that automation is being used, but I just think it needs to be done in a bit more of a personalized and a humanized way that sort of puts them in the situation and sort of I suppose ultimately showing a bit of empathy for them in terms of what it is they might be going through, or the challenge or the solution that they might be looking for. You want to give them that warm, fuzzy feeling that they're dealing with someone that isn't just treating them like another number. Your tech stack we've talked about, because that's really going to be essential to understanding how you can link these different systems and services together and linking the processes together as well. So be cautious and think carefully about how you choose different apps for your business systems to make sure that they will be compatible or they'll support any ambitions that you might have to introduce automation as you go forwards. And then, of course, we've looked at some automation examples: social media, accounting and invoice handling, booking appointments, and using things like Google Forms or Microsoft Forms, because most businesses will either be using Google Workspace or Microsoft Office 365. So those are built in to that kind of platform. And then we've touched on some key points around planning your automations. Final point is that there is a Digital Skills Academy Masterclass, which I'm also running. It basically expands on some of the points that we've talked about today. It's free to those companies that are enrolled in the Digital Tech Cumbria program. It is 3 2-hour-long sessions with myself. There will be homework in between those sessions, so there's some actionable steps for you to put into practice. We will go through more detailed examples, hopefully giving you some ideas and inspiration. We actually also walk through the process of setting up some automations within a customer relationship management system as well, again, for marketing growth and opportunities there. And there is more time to have specific advice around your specific use cases. So that starts next week, 7th of October. It runs at 1 p.m. for 2 weeks. And also on the same day, in fact, there is this digital technology showcase, which is a virtual online event. There's some great speakers. I myself count myself as one of them. But we've got Jill Haig from Cumbria Tourism, Philippa Glover from CNC Robotics. So that does go into a little bit more about the robotic side. There's payments, online ticketing, a variety of different speakers at that event, which again is available for anybody on the Digital Tech Cumbria program. And that runs all day next week, but you can dip in or dip out. Finally, if you've enjoyed the webinar, then please do consider sharing it on your social media channels. And I realize we are pressed for time, so I'm happy to take any Q&A. That brings us just up to just about an hour as we waited for other people to join us at the beginning and my little break in the middle.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Just while you're thinking of any questions, we're just going to launch our usual poll, which we do just to ensure that we're on target with our discussion points. If you just can take a few minutes just to fill that in, that would be great. Andrew's covered off the main points. Next week, we start with the masterclass, and we also have the technology showcase, so I won't keep you to that. So yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you very much for your time, guys. If you don't wish to fill in the poll, we'll say goodbye to you now. And if you do, please, thank you. We'd be very grateful just to ensure that we are there and on track. But yeah, no, thank you very much for that. Nathan's just said thank you very much. I know he's out of area, but I assume he'll have found that extremely useful. So Natasha and Amy, thank you very much. And we'll see you next week.